Hello again, everyone. I'm Tom Nagorski. Welcome to the Cipher Brief virtual studio. Here for a conversation about President Donald Trump's first visit in this second term to another country. He is going overseas, and his first stop actually was his first stop in his first term is Saudi Arabia, then to the Persian Gulf nations of Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. Joining us is Ambassador Gary Grappo, Cipher Brief expert, ambassador with a lot of experience in that part of the world. He was ambassador to Oman and posted to other countries in the region. And Ambassador Grappo, I wonder, there's a lot on the table for this one, not just his first trip. And to the extent you can say this or hazard some educated guesses, what would you say are the administration's sort of top couple of aims, agenda items, whatever you want to call them, with the trip to Saudi Arabia next week?
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you, Tom. As with any president's visit to the kingdom, there are some standard items that are always on the menu for discussion for both sides. Clearly, the overall security situation in the Middle East, and specifically in this case, that would be an actual long menu, but of most interest to the Saudis would be Iran and the status of those talks. I'm sure they're getting regular updates from the administration, but it'll be an opportunity for them to hear directly from the president and his thoughts. Secondly, where things are headed in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
We've heard a lot of about what the Israelis intend to do in Gaza with this reoccupation plan, which has not taken effect yet and probably won't for another week and a half to possibly 2 weeks. And there's some potential positioning going on there. And then, of course, when you talk about the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, and particularly under the presidency of Mr. Trump, there's always going to be discussion about investment interests, trade, and what the general security situation is like with respect to Saudi Arabia itself, and what the United States can do to support them, including the export of various defense systems. So those in general are going to be on the list of items for discussion. I think there'll be a big emphasis on security and trade and investment.
The future of national security is here. Introducing the Cipher Brief's NatSec Edge Conference, June 5th through 6th, 2025 in Austin, Texas. Join leaders from intelligence, defense, private industry, and investment as they explore the innovations shaping tomorrow's world. Gain critical insights, connect with top minds, and shape the future of security in an interconnected world. Don't just witness the future, be a part of it. Secure your spot now at natsecedge.com.
On the transactional, the business stuff that you just outlined, it's getting a lot of attention and headlines, even well before the visit, and not surprisingly, I guess, given that it's the kingdom, some staggering numbers being thrown around here. Semaphore reported this morning that it's the hottest ticket in Riyadh next week is to get into the Saudi-U.S. Investment Forum, and $1.4 trillion is a tagline here for investment pledged by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates into the U.S. Is it fair to say that this sort of outweighs a lot of the other geopolitical security stuff? I mean, is this why you think Donald Trump is making his first visit a visit to the kingdom again?
Well, speaking to the specific interest of the president, there's no question that a major interest of his is investment and trade. That's what he feels he knows best. And in fact, it's most definitely in the interest of the United States from the perspective of the Saudis, the Emiratis, perhaps others. Those countries are all moving their investments to more advanced technology. We're looking at AI, solar, all of these things that the United States offers particular opportunities to them for their investment. And it was several months back, the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, had indicated an interest in investing as much as $1 trillion. So that's consistent with the 1.4 trillion you mentioned to include perhaps investment from the other Gulf states. So a major item on the docket, and clearly an interest to the president. He believes it sells well, which it will clearly here in this country in terms of jobs and so forth. But I don't think, in a particular case of the Saudis, that you can set aside the geostrategic concerns that they have. Now, the situation, the overall conditions in that part of the world are significantly different than what they were when the president last visited. Now we're talking, 8 years ago?
Right. Well,
So things have changed, and that's what they're going to be discussing, I'm very certain of.
and just to pick up on that, I went back and looked at that itinerary 8 years ago. And of course, the very significant difference is President Trump 8 years ago went to Saudi and then went to Israel. It has not escaped a lot of people's attention that Israel, at least for the moment, is not on the itinerary for his first visit. What's your take on that?
That is a bit of a surprise, and that's not to say that he won't visit Israel. I mean, the president likes surprises, and he could potentially drop by. I know the Israelis are lobbying strongly to get the president to include Jerusalem on his Middle East visit. There's been no formal announcement. It really depends on what comes out of his visit to the Gulf. And I say that because just today there was an announcement, I believe, from the president himself about a pending big announcement coming. What that might be, and there are several possibilities, is unknown. If it involves, for example, Gaza, then it would not surprise me if the president decided to make a stop on his way back in Israel. If it's something else, a new strategic agreement or treaty between the United States and Saudi Arabia, that would not necessarily entail a visit to Israel. But when he says big announcement, I mean, it could be part of his tendency to exaggerate sometimes, but maybe he has something big, and there are some big potentialities.
Yeah, always. Now, speaking of big announcements and big deals, you and I have talked about this before, a little more recently than Trump's first term, but now almost 3 years ago, there was a feeling or an understanding that a Saudi-Israeli rapprochement might be coming on the heels of the Abraham Accords negotiated in Trump's first term. And it seemed that the Hamas attacks and the war in Gaza just sort of threw that all out the window. We know that Donald Trump would love nothing more than to reinvigorate that and add that to his portfolio of Middle East accords. Do you think that's still just a distant dream given the reality on the ground in Gaza right now?
As long as the situation remains unchanged in Gaza, I would have to say that is the case. That would not exclude, however, the other part of that grand deal, which would be a U.S. Saudi Arabia strategic defense treaty. And this would not include the recognition of the state of Israel. If the situation were to change in Gaza, and if the Israelis were to indicate some willingness at some point in the distant future to begin negotiations on an independent Palestinian state, that would most certainly change the calculus. I don't envision that for Bibi Netanyahu, but on the other hand, getting Saudi recognition would be an extraordinary event and a real feather in the cap of Bibi Netanyahu. If history will rewrite his prime ministry in a much different way if he's able to secure recognition of Saudi Arabia, because one can probably reasonably expect that other Arab countries and other Muslim countries will follow suit. So, although I think it's somewhat a distant prospect, given what we currently know about the situation in Gaza and Mr. Netanyahu's attitudes toward the Palestinians and a Palestinian state, but sometimes Mr. Trump can be very persuasive.
Yeah. And let's come back just for a moment, Ambassador, to Iran. Uh, interestingly, whereas the Ukraine ceasefire arrangements seem to they are faltering at best, as we've said, nothing close to a ceasefire in Gaza. And I'm not sure many people would have guessed that 3+ months in, the deal that seems to have at least some hope is a new arrangement vis-a-vis the nuclear weapons program, or nuclear program, I should say, in Iran. Is that clearly that's going to be a subject of conversation with the Saudis? And it's probably another thing that gives the Israelis pause, right?
It most certainly does, because we certainly have information to indicate that Mr. Netanyahu and his very conservative government was leaning toward attacking Iran and its nuclear infrastructure. And reportedly, the president nixed that, and in place is pursuing these negotiations, which are proceeding, from everything that we have heard, reasonably well, although notwithstanding some pretty serious obstacles that are going to be that are necessary to overcome. So the Saudis will have something to say, and what is markedly different this time around versus 8 years ago is 8 years ago the Saudis were not in favor of the JCPOA, and I'm sure they gave Mr. Trump at that time an earful about it, and may have been a contributing factor in his decision to withdraw from the JCPOA. This time around, however, situation is much different. The Saudis have carried out a rapprochement of sorts with the Iranians. They are trying to improve that relationship, as trying as that may be from time to time. And the last thing they want to see is another Middle East conflict, especially one involving Iran. They feel they would be somehow sucked into that, and that's probably a safe assumption. So they will probably be cheering Mr. Trump on in terms of the ongoing negotiations to find a way to cut a deal that meets the minimum requirements of not only the United States and Israel, but of Saudi Arabia with respect to Iran's nuclear program.
Now, before we wrap, Ambassador, you talk about how things have changed. I'm reminded that it isn't that long ago, if we spin around from the Trump administration's view and just think about the Saudi perspectives, not that long ago that after the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, that the aim of the Biden administration, at least, was, I think they used the word pariah for the Saudis, right? And here they are, not only welcoming an American president on his first visit, hosting this big investment forum, hosting peace talks, on a number, it's perhaps not that surprising, but it's a comeback, isn't it?
Most definitely, and it speaks to the really extraordinary role that Saudi Arabia plays in the Middle East, and also to the strategy that I think Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, has in elevating the stature of Saudi Arabia internationally, not just in the region, and doing things like hosting. Of course, there was a visit from Mr. Biden during his administration, the first Trump visit in 2018, I believe, and now this one. They've played host to numerous major sporting events, investment forums, you name it. They really have stepped onto the international stage, and the real evidence is they're hosting diplomatic talks, very high level diplomatic talks that don't involve the Middle East. Yeah. For example, the Russia-Ukraine discussion. So this is all part and parcel, I think, of Saudi Arabia's grand strategy to be a global player, which they are, certainly on the economic front and now on the political/diplomatic front.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Ambassador Gary Grappo, great to have you with us. Maybe we'll talk on the other side when the president comes home and And we'll know about that surprise and maybe some other things. Thanks
Yes.
so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.